It just came across to me that we can do this a completely different way. I want to try it. I think it's experimental, but this is going to be the Master Duel tier list post Passage of the Sun and the Duelist Cup that just happened. So before we get into this tier list, I just want to say I think every single one of these decks with the correct pilot can get the diamond, but we're going to be ranking these decks on the ease of being able to get the diamond, how powerful these decks actually are in the current competitive metagame. Of course, I'll also even be mentioning the tier limit cards that may be coming out very soon. We're not 100% sure if it'll be mid to late April, but when those cards do get confirmed and when we do get a confirmation of everything else, we'll do a tier list then. So how I want to do this is I actually want to start off by talking about the decks that aren't it and then work our way up to easy diamonds. I think that would be really, really fun. Some decks that aren't necessarily it, and I don't think that these are completely terrible Yu-Gi-Oh decks. You're just going to have the hardest of times being able to climb with them because you're going to experience a lot of power creep and inconsistency issues. So easily with This Ain't It, I would say ABC 100% fits that category. The problem with ABC is that it's not consistent enough. It's a really, really good deck when it is consistent, but unfortunately due to Union Carrier being banned, and it not having the adventure engine at full power, it's going to be an extraordinarily hard deck to play. I would also say decks like Blue Eyes and Dark Magician are, and This Ain't It. To be honest, almost every single anime Yu-Gi-Oh deck, unfortunately, is a money trap. I would not buy any of those decks whatsoever. If you guys are just jumping into Master Duel and you're wondering what to play, if it's an anime deck, stay away from it. Most of the time, most anime decks are not good and not worth it because they're way too expensive in their gem usage. They require way too many ultras to be able to build, and they don't give you the payback that you would want. Both Dark Magician and Blue Eyes are fairly inconsistent Yu-Gi-Oh decks that don't give you enough for what you're doing. I know what you guys are saying. Dark Magician does have a structure deck, and that's nice for 1,500 gems. You'll be able to craft most of the Dark Magician cards, but you'll still need some other cards that will separate you from being a competitive Dark Magician. And then on top of that, this deck is power creep. So I wouldn't necessarily play any of those decks. We are getting some more cards in the new Passage of the Sun. That would be Mayakashi, Crawler. We're getting Winged Dragon of Ra support, and I believe we're getting the Witchcrafter support. Out of those four, I would 100% say that Winged Dragon of Ra support, don't do it, my guys. It's almost like if it's an anime deck, you should literally do the opposite of what you're thinking if you're thinking of picking up the deck. Winged Dragon of Ra does get some pretty good cards. I guess that's cool, but outside of being able to get Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode, I think Passage of the Sun is going to be a set that you might want to skip and just save your gems for a next upcoming set. Another deck that I would say is going to be, no, I think we're actually good. If we need to come back to This Ain't It, we'll go into it. Moving on to Hard to Play. I actually think that Crawlers, they got some busted Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Crawlers is not a terrible deck. It's just a flip effect based deck. And unfortunately, because it's a flip effect based deck, it's a little bit harder to play because it's a slower Yu-Gi-Oh strategy. I actually do think Crawlers is a little bit better than what people give it credit. And the new Crawler monster, I think it's Crawler Soma. This card's actually really, really good and helps the deck a lot. But you're in an uphill battle by playing this deck. I would say the same for Mayakashi. Mayakashi is a lot better, especially with the Ishizu cards. And that's one thing that I have to say about Master Duel that it has over the TCG, is by the time we got the Ishizu cards, tier limit was already pretty much at full power, and this put them ridiculously over the top. Now people can experiment with the Ishizu cards in other decks, and Zombie has always been fairly good with the Ishizu cards, and this Mayakashi strategy is built on the graveyard to the end. This could actually be takes a really good pilot to really good when the dust settles. Until we get tier limits, then I think the only Ishizu deck that would really be worth it would probably be tier limits. Another deck that I think is incredibly hard to play here, I would say Witchcrafters. If we're getting the Witchcrafter cards that I think we're getting, which is the new cards from Magnificent Mavens, unfortunately it didn't do anything in the TCG, but keep in mind we were already in a format that was warped where tier limit was the only good deck. I think Witchcrafters, from what I've seen, the Grass is Greener Witchcrafter is actually a fairly fun deck to play, but I don't think that it's an easy deck to play. I think that you have to know knowledge on it, and you have to consider that you're going in an uphill battle. Some other decks that I would say are just hard to play, I would say Scareclaw, especially going into the tier limit meta that we're soon going to receive. Scareclaw is pretty much going to completely fall off the map, unfortunately, for a little bit. There's going to be some players that can be really good at Scareclaw, but my Initial assumption of Scareclaw coming into this format is that it's going to be a harder to play deck. I would also say when Tier Limit comes out, a lot of these special summon heavy decks are going to be extremely hard to play, depending on what they get. Because if they get a monster like Tier Limit Rukalos, it becomes like very, very hard because they can just disrupt you on your turn. And you already know that they have the graveyard manipulation to disrupt your deck. I would say Outlich is extremely hard to play as well. The reason why I say Outlich is extremely hard to play is because the Ishizu cards are already being played a lot. But once players get more into the Ishizu cards, Outlich becomes less and less of a playable deck because they'll just shuffle in your Outlich Golden Lord at the most inopportune times, right? That grass deck, I would say takes a really good pilot. I think that they're a little bit above, and I think maybe these decks, I'll probably go back to hard to play if I need to, but I think these decks are maybe solid right now. In the takes a really good pilot, grass decks would be it, because a lot of players are just focused on getting to grass as greener. You guys are playing a 60 card deck, so the most important thing would be building your deck correctly to be able to aptly go into the format. It's going to be really good, especially when you consider that the Ishizu cards are only going to make grass decks a little bit better because it's free fusion summoning. And depending on the Ishizu cards or the Tier Limit cards that we get, this deck can be extremely, extremely powerful. It might be an easy diamond deck really soon. So I would not count this deck out. Oh, I do actually have another hard to play. That's going to be Dinomorphia. Dinomorphia is incredibly hard to play right now. Dinomorphia doesn't do enough in the Yu-Gi-Oh card game to be able to play the game how it wants to be played. Now, granted, being able to summon a monster that negates all of your opponent's monsters with the new Rexsturm is really good, but overall, it doesn't necessarily do enough to be able to contend inside of this Yu-Gi-Oh metagame, and only gets worse as more sets come out. Holy, I think that's all that we have for hard to play. Takes a really good pilot. Dino has almost everything that it needs to be able to contend inside of the game right now. But unfortunately, you have to know exactly what you're doing to be able to play Dinos. I wouldn't recommend this for any player getting in because Dino is incredibly expensive almost for no reason, but it's a really fun deck to play. And if you're a Dino enthusiast, you should already know the deal here. I would say the same thing for Ignister and Rocket Dragon Link. These decks take a really good pilot. Dragon Link will almost never be bad. Like it's just, even with the Ishizu cards, even with the disruptions that come out, Dragon Link will almost never be bad. It is just a very, very fun and powerful deck to play. But right now, I would say both Ignister and Rocket Dragon Link would take a really good pilot to be able to manage. Same thing with Drytron. These decks will not give you easy Ws, but they're so rewarding to play inside of the game. I would also give that category to Tri-Brigade. The Ishizu cards, it's like Ishizu is here and then it's not there and then it's sometimes there. But just the prevalence of the Ishizu cards that I've been experiencing through my rank and why watching a lot of high-ranked duelists does make Tri-Brigade a lot worse. Because if you do get your BBW cards into the graveyard and then they get shuffled back into the deck, that's almost game over unless you can supply your graveyard with more cards. I do think that one of the better variants of Tri-Brigade would be Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk because it can play through hand trap support and it's a fairly good deck. Other than that, I think Plunder Patrol definitely hard to play. Really, really hard to play. Your best card for Plunder Patrol is going to be Mork right now, and especially when the Ishizus come out, when the Tier Limits come out, the Ishizu cards don't allow you to morph to anything because we don't have our yard yet. It's just not in a great spot, but it's still a really, really fun deck. And if you guys really love Plunder Patrol, I'm not going to stop you from playing it, right? Moving forward, man, we got a lot here. On to the really good. Okay, Marine Cess is really good. This deck only gets better with time. And it's kind of crazy that Marine Cess, even in the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, is extremely powerful. It's a really, really fun deck to play. One of the best attributes that Marine Cess has is the ton of hand traps that you can play. But I do want to give you guys a fair warning. Coming up, when Tier Limits come out, Ishizu is almost going to, oh my God, Marine Cess is almost going to disappear because hand traps are not going to be effective. You guys have Sprite going on right now, which makes hand traps look bad. Then you'll also have Tier Limits, which makes hand traps look even worse. So both of those will probably fade out those Cybers decks for a little bit unless they get checked pretty hard. Adamantipator is going to be really good. With less hand traps, this deck will even be able to pop off even harder. It's going to be extremely good. I will say that Nibiru the Primal Being is going to be a card that players are going to play if Tier Limit does not have the monster named Tier Limit Rukalos. If they don't have that, Nibiru is almost a must-play Yu-Gi-Oh card. And a lot of the dynamics of these decks kind of switch up a little bit. But until then, Adamant Debater is just a really solid, powerful Yu-Gi-Oh deck that's extremely good and can win you games. Despia, I would also say, is extremely good right now. I mean, I think we could argue and say that it's diamond worthy, but with Aliber Jester of Despia at 2, with Branded Opening at 2, it's a little bit less consistent. And you should already know most people in the high ranks are going to be playing Ash Blossom and Joy Spring. If not for the Maxi, well, because Branded Fusion exists, so it's always going to be a free card. You're always going to have to play around that. Floowandereeze, I would say, takes a really good pilot. That's a deck that doesn't go into really good, but 100% goes into the takes a really good pilot. You can't just Barrier Storm statue your way into a victory anymore. Labyrinth, I would say Labyrinth is pretty good. And Labyrinth does get a lot better when we get the Lady Labyrinth of the Silver Castle. That card is crazy good. Or maybe I'm saying the other one. The 3000 attack girl. Not the one we currently have. That makes the deck really good. But what makes this deck, another thing that makes this deck good is that the more trap cards that we get, hopefully you guys get cards like exclusives like Drama Cannon, which is going to be an incredible Yu-Gi-Oh card. But there are so many things that make this deck so much better. One would be the prevalence of other great trap cards. The next would be Lady Labyrinth of the Silver Castle. My apology. The next would be Drama Cannon. The others would be Big Welcome. And I can actually see a particular pack that gives us Labyrinth support with Big Welcome and the Lady Labyrinth in the same pack, which would make this deck insane. Right now, it's taking over the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. I think because it's not special summon heavy, because it's trap based, because it can play the correct floodgates, it actually is a solid answer to Tearlament, especially if you can flip that skill drain up and just summon big monsters. Mathmech, I would still say, is one of the easy diamond Yu-Gi-Oh decks, despite there being a Shizu Shufflers, and despite there being so many people just pointing towards Mathmech. The reason why I would say that is because as long as the Bestial monsters aren't out just yet, that's actually what took out Mathmech. Because before the Bestial monsters, this deck was extremely good against a Shizu. And this deck, or Tearlament, this deck can also play against Nibiru fairly well. It's one of the only Cybers decks that can still OTK through Nibiru. I would say Punk is also easy diamond right now. We played against a ton of Punk. I've seen Punk Runic. I've seen Pure Punk. I've seen Punk Therion. I've seen Punk Sprite. I've seen just so many variants of Punk. And that's actually really cool because it makes different choke points where you can hit. Sometimes when you see Punk cards, the most correct thing is to hit the Fusion monster, which is Yu-Gi-Oh! And then other times when they're not playing Pure, you have to hit the Foxy Tune, which makes it incredibly hard to be able to pinpoint a particular sequence to hand trap your opponent. And that's what makes this deck extremely strong, especially with him being able to play the Ishizu cards and mill like crazy. Rika, I would also say, is a really good Yu-Gi-Oh deck. I would 100% say Rika's really, really good right now. One card combos are always nasty, and being able to tribute off your opponent's monsters, this actually might be one of the better decks going against the Tearlament deck, because it can just tribute and out your opponent's board for free. Runic, unfortunately, is still really good, but fortunately enough, it's better as an engine. I would say Runic Sprite is probably the best version right now, but there's other Runic decks that can be fairly successful. Sprite is easy diamond, guys. Easy, easy, easy diamond. If you're playing Sprite, you already know what it is, guys. This deck does punish so many hand traps in the card game, and it just makes people look really, really bad. And then lastly is Swordsoul. I would personally say Swordsoul is easy and diamond, but that's probably because of my bias. I think it's a really solid deck. Currently, we're on a ridiculous win streak with Swordsoul. We've probably played close to 80 games and have only lost 4. This deck has not really lost any luster. The big problem that's going to happen, though, is if Tearlaments come into the game without Rukalos and Nibiru is big, then this card definitely would have to take a back seat, because Nibiru is like one of the game killers for this deck, especially with Long Yuan being at 1. There's no consistent way to be able to make a Swordsoul Shishao before you get into your games. Other than that, that's pretty much all that I have for the Master Duel tier list post Patches of the Sun, and from the information that we have from the Duelist Cup. I really hope you guys enjoyed. If you disagree with one of my takes, go ahead and let me know down below in the comment section. I really do appreciate it, and I'll catch you on the next one.